My perfect husband just gifted me a $10,000 retreat package to recharge, but his eyes held the gleam of a man clearing an obstacle. He thinks I am thousands of miles away, leaving our home spa for him and his mistress, but he does not know I never boarded that plane. I am standing right outside the steam-fogged glass door, ready to turn his sinful paradise into a living hell. My name is Elena Vance, and the morning at the penthouse of Vane Tower began with expensive silence. Sunlight sliced through the layers of tempered glass, illuminating the cold marble dining table where I sat alone. I twisted the large diamond ring on my finger, a nervous habit I had developed recently, while I listened to the confident footsteps of my husband echoing from the hallway. There was a shift in the atmosphere today, a strange vibration in the air. I could feel an unusual excitement radiating from Marcus, a stark contrast to the grumpy fatigue that had defined his mornings for the past year. Marcus strode into the kitchen with a smile that could rival the sun, placing a thick cream envelope directly in front of me. The gold logo of the Elysium Retreat, the most secluded and exclusive resort in Arizona, shimmered under the recessed lighting. He wrapped his arms around my shoulders, leaning in to whisper in my ear. His voice was deep and warm, but to my trained ear, it reeked of performance. He told me that I looked absolutely exhausted after the company merger and that I needed to leave immediately to recharge. I felt the weight of his hand on my shoulder, and it did not feel like the embrace of a protector. It felt like the firm grip of a jailer pushing a prisoner toward a solitary confinement cell. I opened the envelope and slid out the contents. It was a first-class plane ticket departing tomorrow morning and a dense schedule of spa treatments lasting exactly 10 days. I looked up at Marcus and caught his eyes scanning my face, searching for my reaction. For a split second, a flash of triumph crossed his features. It was so fast that if we had not been married for 8 years, I would have missed it entirely. He immediately started urging me to pack, making up an excuse that he also had to fly to New York to handle a sudden public relations crisis for the corporation. As Marcus turned his back to the counter to brew his artisanal coffee, I noticed his phone lying face down on the table. It vibrated once, a movement so slight it was barely perceptible, but the screen lit up against the polished black stone. I could not read the content of the message, but the sender name was clearly visible. It read, Real Estate Consultant, followed immediately by a bright red heart emoji. That symbol was a paradoxical scream in the silence of the kitchen. My intuition, the same gut instinct that had helped me build a technology empire from zero, told me the truth instantly. This was not a generous gift. This was an expulsion order. Marcus turned back around, continuing his monologue about how I would enjoy hot stone massages and deep meditation, but his eyes kept darting toward the wall clock. I gave him a smile that was as thin as smoke and whispered a thank you. Inside my mind, however, I was rewinding every strange occurrence from the past month. The late-night meetings, the scent of foreign perfume clinging to his suit jackets, and the way he avoided my gaze. I decided right then to play the role of the obedient wife. I would accept this poisoned gift just to see how his little play would end. When I walked up the floating staircase to prepare my luggage, I heard Marcus whistling softly downstairs. It was a cheerful, bouncing melody that he had not hummed since the days we were newlyweds. The sound echoed through the vast, empty house like a mockery, confirming that my absence was the one thing he desired most in the world right now. I gripped the banister tightly, my fingernails digging into my own skin to stop the anger from erupting. Patience, I told myself, was the ultimate weapon, inside the walk-in closet. I did not reach for the maxi dresses or swimwear that Marcus expected me to pack for a vacation. Instead, I folded my sharpest business suits into the suitcase. Before closing the bag, I picked up my tablet to check the home security system. I wanted to see if the perimeter was secure, but I discovered something far more telling. The entire camera network had been manually disabled from the administrator account that belonged to Marcus. The black screens of the blind cameras stared back at me, yet they revealed the truth more clearly than any high-definition image could. That night, lying next to Marcus, I listened to the steady rhythm of his breathing. It was the cruel, peaceful sleep of a traitor who believed his plan was flawless. I opened my eyes and stared at the ceiling, listening to the wind hissing outside the window. It felt like a storm was gathering inside my own chest. Tomorrow morning, I would step into the car to go to the airport, but I knew with absolute certainty that my destination would not be Arizona. The sleek black limousine pulled up to the curb in the gray light of early dawn, looking like a hearse waiting to transport a corpse rather than a vacationer. My family driver, who had been with me since before I met Marcus, hurried to load my suitcase into the trunk. Marcus stood on the sidewalk, performing the role of the devoted husband for an audience of none. He kissed me goodbye with a fervor that felt staged, his hands gripping my waist tightly. It felt less like an embrace and more like he was physically guiding me into the vehicle to ensure I actually left. He told me he loved me, but his eyes were already traveling over my shoulder, scanning the empty road behind me as if he were waiting for someone else to step onto the stage the moment I exited. I sat in the back of the car and watched the image of my husband shrink in the rearview mirror, the moment he thought I was out of sight. His face transformed. The mask of concern dropped, replaced by a look of profound relief that he made no effort to hide. I waited until the limousine turned past 2 intersections and the penthouse tower was completely blocked from view before I calmly knocked on the glass partition. The driver lowered the divider, looking at me in the mirror with surprise, though he knew better than to ask questions. He was one of the few staff members who remained loyal to me, a relic from the time before Marcus began systematically replacing my people with his own. I told him to take me to a small cafe in the suburbs because I had forgotten some important documents. Then I added that he was to take the next 3 days off with full pay. My voice was ice cold and left no room for argument. The driver nodded, sensing the gravity of the situation. He reached down and switched off the GPS navigation app that Marcus used to track the fleet, effectively making us a ghost on the digital map. The car glided smoothly toward the outskirts of the city, but inside my chest, the engine was roaring. It was the sound of a hunter stepping into position. The cafe was nearly empty at this hour. I chose a table in a secluded corner and opened my laptop. I bypassed the standard user interface of our smart home system and activated a backdoor program I had written myself. Marcus might have had administrator privileges, but he lacked the technical coding skills to detect a hidden root access. The screen flashed a message confirming the connection was successful, and immediately, the audio sensors throughout the penthouse began streaming data to my headphones. I held my breath, waiting for the first sounds that would confirm the death of my marriage. It took only 30 minutes from the time I left. The sensor on the front door chimed, indicating the lock had been disengaged. It was not opened with a physical key or Marcus's biometric data, but with a temporary guest code. The sharp, rhythmic clatter of high heels striking the marble floor echoed through the audio feed. The sound was confident and invasive, piercing the sanctuary I had worked so hard to build. A young, lilting female voice floated through the speakers, asking if the old witch was finally gone. The blood in my veins felt like it had turned into solid ice. I recognized the voice instantly. It was Serafina, the 24-year-old creative director of our rival company. She was the same woman Marcus had once dismissed in front of me as nothing more than a decorative vase. I heard the sound of glass clinking against glass, followed by Marcus's laughter. He mocked me, telling her that I was flying straight to the middle of nowhere so they could turn the house into their own private paradise. Every word was a dagger aimed straight at my self-esteem, but I did not shed a tear. Instead, a cold, ruthless clarity washed over me. Through the audio feed, I heard them discussing their plans for the sanctuary, the private high-end spa located in the secluded west wing of the villa. It was my personal retreat, a place I used to decompress after closing massive deals. Serafina whined playfully that she wanted to try my gold-plated hot tub, and Marcus laughed loudly, promising to serve her like a queen. This was not merely infidelity. It was a public desecration of my territory and my dignity. I closed the laptop with a dry, sharp snap that sounded like a gunshot in the quiet cafe. I stood up and adjusted the lapels of my black trench coat. I put on my sunglasses to hide eyes that were burning with rage. I did not need to hear anymore. I needed to see it. More importantly, I needed them to see me. I walked out of the cafe and hailed a rideshare vehicle. My fingers were perfectly steady as I typed in my home address. The taxi sped down the highway as the sky outside began to bruise with the slate gray of an impending summer storm. I sat in silence in the back seat, watching the first heavy drops of rain lash against the glass, creating long, distorted streaks that looked like scratches on a sole. My mind drifted back to the lean years when Marcus and I were building the company from nothing. I remembered the nights we shared a single cup of instant noodles, dreaming of the future. Now, looking at the rain, I realized those memories were nothing but a rotting foundation for this vile betrayal. My phone vibrated in my hand, lighting up with a text from Marcus. He asked if I had boarded the plane yet, added that he missed me, and told me to have a fun trip. The brazen hypocrisy of those words made bile rise in my throat. I did not reply. Instead, I quietly switched the phone to Do Not Disturb mode. My silence would convince him that I was 30,000 feet in the air, disconnected from the world, and it would make him even more reckless in his debauchery. The car turned onto the private road leading up to the secluded villa on the hill, where rows of cypress trees stood like silent sentinels. I instructed the driver to stop at the rear service gate, a location I knew was completely hidden from the main security cameras in the garage line of sight. I handed the driver a generous tip and stepped out into the weather. The cold wind cut through my coat, but instead of shivering, I felt it awaken every nerve ending in my body, sharpening my senses like a razor. I walked along the stone wall that enclosed the garden, the dry leaves crushing softly under the sneakers I had changed into for silent movement. I knew every blind spot in the security grid and every shortcut the gardeners used. The villa loomed before me, magnificent and imposing, but tonight it felt hostile. It was no longer my home. It was an enemy fortress that I was forced to besiege. I approached the back door that led into the kitchen and gently keyed in the emergency override code. It was a sequence of numbers corresponding to the birth date of the child we had lost 3 years ago, a date I knew Marcus had deleted from his memory long ago. The lock disengaged with a soft click that was almost swallowed by the wind. I stepped inside, and the familiar scent of my home was gone, replaced by a suffocating cloud of foreign perfume. It smelled of lilies and cheap musk, a scent that did not belong here. The interior was pitch black. The heavy curtains had been drawn tight to create a private cocoon for the adulterers, leaving only the faint, ghostly glow of the floorboard LED strip lights to guide the way. I slipped off my sneakers and walked barefoot on the freezing hardwood floor, my steps cautious and deliberate. My heart was hammering against my ribs, not from fear, but from the massive surge of adrenaline pumping into my brain, preparing me for a mortal confrontation. As I passed the living room, I saw Marcus's suit jacket discarded carelessly on the sofa. Right beside it, a thin red silk dress lay crumpled on the floor. These physical pieces of evidence lay there like challenges, mocking me to my face. I pulled out my phone and switched the camera to video mode, selecting the 4K resolution setting. My hand remained incredibly steady as I panned across the mess of clothing, documenting every tiny detail. Melodic music drifted down the hallway leading to the spa, accompanied by the sound of splashing water and giggling. The sound was like a hammer striking my eardrums, urging me to move faster. I stood before the heavy oak door that separated the main house from the spa wing. I took a deep breath, suppressing the wave of nausea rising in my stomach. My hand touched the cold metal handle. ready to open this Pandora's box and reveal the naked truth inside. The heavy oak door swung open without a single squeak, a testament to the hinges I had oiled personally just last month. A wall of hot, humid air immediately slapped me in the face, carrying the overpowering scent of lemongrass essential oil mixed with the yeasty, metallic tang of spilled champagne. The home spa was designed to resemble a natural stone cavern, usually bathed in warm, healing amber light to induce relaxation. But tonight, under the influence of my husband and his mistress, it looked less like a sanctuary and more like a damp, sordid den of vice. The steam hung thick and heavy in the air, blurring the visual details into ghostly shapes while simultaneously amplifying the wet, fleshy sounds of lust echoing off the rock walls. I pressed myself deep into the shadows of a decorative slate wall, peering through the shifting fog. My eyes scanned the floor and landed on the wreckage of our history. Lying on the wet stone were bottles of Chateau Margaux, 1982. That was the vintage I had painstakingly sourced and saved for our upcoming 10th wedding anniversary. Now, they were uncorked and rolling aimlessly in puddles of water. Shards of broken crystal lay scattered nearby, catching the blue LED reflection from the pool. They glittered sharply in the gloom, looking exactly like the jagged fragments of the marriage I was watching disintegrate before my eyes. The sound of splashing water drew my gaze to the center of the room. The massive jacuzzi, surrounded by floor-to-ceiling glass walls that offered a view of the valley below, was the centerpiece of the room. Through the mist, I could make out two silhouettes entangled in the churning water. Marcus was leaning back against the edge, a glass of wine in his hand, his head thrown back in an expression of drug-like ecstasy. Serafina straddled his lap, her laugh ringing out shrill and piercing as he whispered something into her ear. I moved inches at a time toward a large stone pillar, timing my steps with the rhythm of the bubbling jets to mask any sound. I needed to be closer. I needed the microphone to catch every syllable. Marcus's voice drifted over, slurred and heavy with alcohol. He told her that I was as stiff as a rock and that being around me made him feel like he had aged 10 years. He called her his life source. Every word was like acid being thrown in my face, stripping away the image of the man I had once worshipped and revealing the rotting character underneath. Serafina ran her hands down his wet chest, her voice dropping to a calculated, whining coo. She asked him when he was finally going to get rid of me because she was tired of being a secret. Marcus laughed, a dark, ugly sound, and took a large gulp of wine. He told her to relax. He explained that after this trip, he would have enough grounds to declare me mentally unstable, suffering from a nervous breakdown. He said I would be deemed unfit to lead. He boasted that the chairmanship and the entire house would belong to them. I felt the blood literally boiling in my veins. This was no longer just about emotional betrayal or a midlife crisis. This was a carefully orchestrated coup. He was planning to steal my assets, my reputation, and my sanity. I squeezed the phone in my pocket, ensuring the recording was still running. I was not just capturing a cheater, I was securing the death warrant for his entire career. Suddenly, the lighting in the spa shifted. The automated system cycled to romantic mode, bathing the room in a dim, lurid purple and red haze. The scene instantly transformed from sleazy to nightmarish. Marcus pulled Serafina down into the water, and they locked into a feral, consuming kiss, oblivious to the universe outside their bubble of arrogance. The splashing water and their satisfied groans created a symphony of betrayal that made me physically shudder with revulsion. I knew I could not wait another second. Every moment I stood there in the dark was an indignity I did not deserve. I pulled my phone out and checked the settings one last time. I toggled the flash to its maximum brightness setting. It was time to step out of the shadows and flood this ugly truth with the most blinding light possible. I took a deep breath, the lemongrass scent now so strong it was choking me, and stepped out from behind the pillar. Just as I was about to take that final step into the light, another sound pierced the humid air. A digital chime rang out, sharp and insistent. It was not coming from Marcus's phone or Seraphina's, which I could see discarded on a wet pile of clothes near the sauna. The sound was coming from a tablet, resting on the dry towel rack a few feet away. Marcus let out a groan of frustration, reluctantly unwinding himself from his mistress. "It is the damn lawyer," he muttered, reaching over and tapping the screen. "Be quiet for a second, baby." He hit the speakerphone button, and the booming, obnoxious voice of his personal attorney, Fletcher, filled the entire spa. "Marcus, did you get it done?" Fletcher barked, his voice tinny and impatient. "Did you move the $5 million from Elena's reserve fund to the Cayman account? The tax inspectors are starting to sniff around that foundation." I froze. My foot, which had been mid-stride, remained suspended in the air. $5 million. He was talking about the entire endowment for the charitable foundation I had established in my late mother's name. This was not just theft. He was not just trying to steal the company. He was actively embezzling funds and setting me up to take the fall. Marcus let out a deep, arrogant laugh that bounced off the stone walls. "It is all taken care of, Fletch. Every single transfer document was forged with her electronic signature. If this ever blows up, Elena Vance will be the only one taking a trip to a federal prison. I will just be the poor, grieving husband whose wife betrayed him." Seraphina giggled, a high-pitched, girlish sound, and splashed hot water onto his chest. "You are so evil," she cooed, "but I love it." This single exchange shifted the entire tectonic plates of the situation. This was no longer a domestic dispute about divorce. This was a high-level criminal conspiracy. An icy dread ran down my spine, instantly extinguishing the hot flames of my jealous rage and replacing it with a cold, sober fear. If I stormed out now, screaming about infidelity, I would be showing my hand. I would be destroying the most critical evidence of his financial crimes, the very evidence I needed to survive. I had to get a clearer recording. I edged closer, my bare feet making no sound on the wet floor. My phone was still filming, and I angled the lens toward the glowing screen of the tablet and Marcus's smug, gloating face. Fletcher's voice crackled on the line again. "Good, very good. Now, what about the fake psychological file? Did Dr. Collins agree to sign off on it?" Marcus's reply was clipped and final. "It is handled. All we need is for Elena to come back from this little trip looking exhausted, and we will have her committed to a private mental institution immediately." I bit down on my lip, my teeth sinking into the soft flesh so hard I tasted the metallic tang of blood. I did it to stop myself from screaming. The sheer, calculated cruelty of the plan was beyond anything I could have imagined. They were not just planning to steal from me. They were planning to erase me, to paint me as insane, to strip me of my freedom and my very identity just to get their hands on my assets. My hand, the one holding the phone, began to tremble violently. I immediately grabbed my wrist with my other hand, forcing it steady. I could not break. I would not let them break me. "Baby, after this is all over, can we buy a yacht?" Seraphina whined, oblivious to the gravity of the conversation she had just witnessed. Marcus kissed her forehead, his voice dripping with condescension. "Of course, my love. We will call it the Seraphina, and we will sail it around the world on that fool's money." Their joint laughter echoed in the steam, a wild and feral sound. I felt as if I were standing on the edge of a cliff, staring down at the monster I had shared a bed with for 8 years. The call finally ended. Marcus tossed the tablet carelessly back onto the rack, the screen going dark. He turned back to Seraphina, his eyes burning with renewed lust. "Now," he growled. "Where were we?" He reached down and scooped her up into his arms, intending to carry her out of the jacuzzi and onto one of the chaise lounges. The moment he stood up, lifting her with a grunt, he was completely exposed. He was fully naked, vulnerable, and utterly unprepared. That was the moment I decided my patience had run its course. I took one final, steadying breath and stepped directly out of the shadows and into the center of the room. I emerged like a goddess of vengeance, my presence announcing the end of their world. The rubber soles of my sneakers shrieked against the wet stone floor, a harsh, discordant sound that instantly shattered the intimate atmosphere of the lovers. I did not say a single word to announce my arrival. Instead, I simply raised my phone high above my head, my thumb pressing down on the shutter button with machine gun rapidity. The flash exploded in the dim room again and again, cutting through the steam like lightning bolts in a violent storm, exposing every inch of their ugly nakedness in blinding high definition. "What the hell is that?" Marcus screamed, his voice cracking in panic. His reflex was to cover his face, but the sudden movement threw him off balance on the slick steps of the jacuzzi. He flailed wildly before crashing back into the water with a massive, undignified splash. Serafina let out a piercing shriek that hurt my ears, scrambling to grab the nearest towel. It was a small hand towel, woefully inadequate to cover her shaking body. The scene before me was chaotic, pathetic, and almost laughable in its sheer absurdity. "Smile for the camera, Marcus," I said, my voice slicing through the humid air, colder and sharper than a scalpel. "This is going to be the most expensive photograph of your entire life." I did not stop shooting. I captured the exact moment he clawed his way back up from the water, his hair plastered to his skull, his face twisted in absolute horror as his eyes adjusted to the light and he realized exactly who was standing in front of him. Marcus stood there frozen, water dripping continuously from his nose and chin, his eyes bulging as if he were looking at a ghost. "Elena," he gasped, struggling to form a coherent sentence. "You are supposed to be on the plane. Why are you here?" He stammered, unable to finish his thought. The confidence and arrogance he had displayed just moments ago had evaporated completely, leaving behind nothing but naked cowardice and raw fear. Serafina huddled in the corner of the tub, her face drained of all color. "What are you doing here?" she hissed, trying to salvage some scrap of dignity with a ridiculous accusation. "This is an invasion of privacy." I looked at her with a gaze so full of contempt it could have withered a plant. Then I turned my attention back to Marcus. "Privacy?" I asked, my voice dripping with sarcasm. "In my house, in the hot tub bought with my money." Marcus attempted to climb out of the tub, one hand frantically trying to cover his groin while he tried to reassemble the authority of the head of the household. "Elena, put the phone down right now," he commanded, though his voice wavered. "Listen to me. It is not what you think. She is just a colleague." He took a step toward me, intending to snatch the phone from my hand, but the wet floor was treacherous. His legs were shaking so badly that he slipped again, nearly planting his face on the stone. "Do not come near me, you disgusting creature," I shouted, the force of my voice physically driving him back. "Explain. What exactly do you want to explain? Marcus, do you want to explain the $5 million you stole? Do you want to explain the fake psychiatric file you ordered? Or maybe you want to tell me more about the yacht named Serafina?" Each question struck him like an invisible slap to the face, the shock registering physically as he realized I had heard every single word. The color drained from Marcus's face until he looked like a corpse that had been in the water for days. He realized that his darkest secrets were no longer secret. He looked around frantically, his eyes darting to the windows in the service entrance, searching for an escape route. But there was only one way out of this room, and I was standing directly in the center of the doorframe. My shadow stretched long across the water, looming over him, enveloping his pathetic existence. The luxury home spa had transformed in an instant into a small, suffocating courtroom, and the verdict was about to be read. Realizing there was no way to lie himself out of this, Marcus's demeanor shifted instantly. The terror vanished, replaced by a desperate, sputtering rage. This was his last-ditch effort to seize control of the narrative. He pulled himself up to his full height, making no attempt to cover his nakedness, and roared at me. "You set me up! You were spying on me! You are pathetic! Elena, you are sick!" His voice echoed off the stone, but it was hollow, all volume and no power. Serafina, seeing his attempt at aggression, took it as her cue. She managed to gather some semblance of composure, wrapped the small hand towel tightly around her hips like a sarong, and stepped out of the water to stand beside him. It was a ludicrous alliance of two naked, pathetic figures. "What do you think you are going to do with those pictures?" she sneered, trying to sound tough. "Marcus is the CEO. He has connections. He has lawyers. You are just some old, boring wife he got tired of." The sheer audacity of her words almost made me laugh. It was a dry, cold sound that held no humor. "CEO," I repeated, my voice dripping with pitying mockery. Let us see how long he holds that title after this audio recording of him detailing $5 million of embezzlement and medical fraud gets sent to the board of directors and to the FBI. I held up my phone, my thumb hovering over the red recording bar that was still pulsing on the screen. My words were the kill shot. The pathetic aggression drained from both of them, replaced by a new, more profound level of panic. With a primal scream of pure desperation, Marcus lunged at me, his eyes fixed on the phone. "Give me that, you bitch! Give me the phone!" He was all animal now, driven by sheer survival instinct. But I had anticipated this. I was always 3 steps ahead. I took one quick step back, my free hand diving into the pocket of my trench coat and emerging with a small canister of pepper spray. "One more step, Marcus. I dare you," I warned him, my finger resting firmly on the trigger. He skidded to a stop on the wet floor, his eyes, now streaked with red veins of fury, locked on the canister. He was trapped. "What do you want?" he panted, his chest heaving, his mind racing to find a new tactic. He switched to the one language he truly understood: negotiation. "Money, is that it? How much? I will give you half. We split everything 50-50. We will have a quiet divorce, no press. Do not make this a public fight. Elena, think of the stock price." He was still trying to appeal to the businesswoman in me, still believing our marriage was just a corporation he could liquidate for a profit. I looked at him as if he were a specimen under a microscope. "Split half?" I asked, genuine confusion in my voice. "Half of what?" "Exactly. What do you think you have to split? This house was in my name before we ever signed a marriage certificate. The company was founded with my inheritance, not yours. And with this evidence of criminal activity, not to mention the airtight prenuptial agreement you signed, you will be walking out of this marriage with nothing. Absolutely nothing. Literally. As you are standing right now." I gestured with the pepper spray to his naked, shivering body, and he instinctively cringed, the shame finally hitting him. Serafina, realizing she had hitched her wagon to a losing horse, finally imploded. "Marcus!" she shrieked, her voice cracking. "You told me you owned all of this. You told me she was just a figurehead." She turned on him, her small fists beginning to pound uselessly against his bare, wet chest. Marcus, in his frustration, shoved her hard, sending her stumbling back onto the tile floor. "Shut up," he screamed at her. "You idiot, do not make this worse." The tragicomedy of their alliance collapsing was almost too much to bear. "That is enough," I said, my voice cutting through their pathetic squabbling. "I am not here to negotiate. I am here to inform you. You two have exactly 15 minutes to gather your things and get out of my house before the security team I have already hired arrives to throw you onto the street." I glanced at my watch, my eyes cold and steady. "The clock is ticking." Marcus laughed, but it was a hollow, desperate sound. "Security team, do not try to scare me. Elena, I am the one who authorizes their payroll." "Who do you think they are going to listen to?" He reached out and snatched a white terry cloth robe from the rack, frantically pulling it on to cover his shivering body, attempting to drape himself in some fabric of authority. But before he could even tie the belt, the piercing wail of sirens erupted from the driveway. Harsh beams of red and blue light swept through the panoramic windows, splashing chaotic patterns against the faux stone walls of the spa. "They are not your security team." "Marcus," I said, my voice dangerously soft. "I fired the residential security firm this morning. The men outside belong to Black Shield Private Security. They answer only to the name on the property deed, and that name is Elena Vance." The color drained from Marcus's face, leaving it a sickly shade of gray. He knew the reputation of Black Shield. They were high-end mercenaries, professionals who operated with military precision and were famously immune to bribes. A booming voice from a loudspeaker penetrated the glass walls. "Attention! We have been authorized by Mrs. Elena Vance to remove all unauthorized trespassers from the premises. Open the doors immediately." The sound hung in the air like a funeral toll for Marcus's massive ego. He rushed to the window and looked down into the courtyard. Through the steam and rain, he saw 2 matte black armored SUVs and a line of 6 imposing figures standing in tactical formation. Serafina unraveled completely. She scrambled on the floor, grabbing her discarded clothes with trembling hands, pulling them onto her wet skin in a frenzy. "I am leaving," she stammered, her voice shrill with panic. "I cannot be involved with police or security. I am a public figure. My brand deals—" She did not even look at Marcus. She simply turned and sprinted out of the spa, her heels clattering unevenly down the hallway as she fled, abandoning the man she had sworn eternal love to just minutes ago. Marcus stood alone in the center of the room, watching the silhouette of his mistress disappear. He slowly turned back to face me, his expression a grotesque cocktail of hatred and pathetic begging. "Elena, are you actually going to do this?" he asked, his voice trembling. "After everything we built, we have been husband and wife for 8 years. Are you really going to kick me out onto the street like a dog?" He was playing the emotional card, the very last weapon in his arsenal. 8 years. I stepped closer to him, maintaining a safe distance but close enough to see the fear in his pupils. For 8 years, I have been nursing a viper in my bosom. For 8 years, I trusted a fraud. You are not being kicked out like a dog. Marcus, dogs have loyalty. Dogs have honor. You are being removed like a parasite that has finally been detected. The double doors to the spa flew open with force. 2 security officers in full tactical gear and dark sunglasses marched in, their expressions blank and unreadable. "Mrs. Vance, is the area secure?" the lead officer asked, his voice deep and professional. I nodded once and pointed a steady finger at Marcus, who was clutching his robe closed with white knuckles. "I am fine. Please remove this individual from my property. Immediately." The 2 officers advanced on Marcus, clamping their hands around his upper arms like iron vices. "Please come with us, sir," one of them said. Marcus began to struggle, flailing weakly against their grip. "Let go of me. I am the owner of this house. I will sue you. I will sue everyone." But his threats were drowned out by the overwhelming physical power of the guards. They dragged him backward, his bare feet sliding uselessly across the wet tile, leaving long streaks of water behind him as he was hauled out of the paradise he had tried to steal. I followed the security team all the way to the main entrance and stood on the high stone steps, looking down at the courtyard. The heavy iron gates slammed shut with a finality that echoed through the cool night air. Marcus was on the other side, standing on the cold asphalt in his bare feet, still clutching that pathetic white towel around his waist to preserve a shred of modesty. Serafina's bright red Mini Cooper was nowhere to be seen. She had fled minutes ago, leaving him to face his humiliation in total isolation. He stood there shivering under the harsh glare of the street lamp, shouting obscenities and curses at the house. But the soundproofing was excellent. To me, he was just a silent, flailing mime performing a tragedy of his own making. The moment the lock engaged, I pulled my phone from my pocket and dialed my personal attorney. Robert was a shark in a tailored suit, a man I had secretly retained a week ago when my suspicions first crystallized into certainty. He answered on the first ring. I told him to file the papers immediately. I instructed him to attach every single file I had just uploaded to the secure cloud server. I demanded that the asset freeze order be effective by 9 in the morning. My voice was steel in the darkness, devoid of the trembling wife who had once sought his approval. Over the next few days, I watched Marcus's life disintegrate with the precision of a controlled demolition. The audio recording, in which he explicitly detailed the embezzlement of funds and the forgery of medical records, found its way anonymously to both the district attorney and the major financial news networks. The headlines were brutal. Images of the once dashing CEO being led out of a squalid short-term rental apartment in handcuffs plastered the internet. The company's stock took a nosedive, but I was ready. I utilized my majority voting rights to convene an emergency board meeting and formally ousted him from his position before the market closed that same day. Marcus tried to reach me. Of course, since I had blocked his number, he resorted to sending hundreds of emails. They ranged from pathetic begging to manipulative threats of self-harm. He confessed that he had lost everything. Serafina had already moved on to an oil tycoon, leaving him to deal with massive gambling debts that he had managed to hide from me for years. I scrolled through his desperate paragraphs with the same detached indifference I used for junk mail. I felt no pity, only a profound sense of lightness, like a malignant tumor had been surgically removed from my life. The final divorce hearing took place 1 month later. Marcus appeared in the courtroom looking like a shadow of his former self. He was gaunt and unshaven, wearing an ill-fitting polyester suit that hung loosely on his frame. He could not even look me in the eye. His court-appointed lawyer made a feeble attempt to claim a portion of the marital assets, but it was a waste of breath. Between the ironclad prenuptial agreement and the overwhelming evidence of his infidelity and criminal conduct, the judge had no patience for him. The gavel came down with a sharp crack, declaring a total victory in my favor. I walked out of the courthouse wearing a crisp white dress, my head held high behind dark sunglasses. A forest of camera lenses and microphones awaited me on the steps, but I offered no comment. I gave no explanation. My silence was the loudest statement of power I could make. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw Marcus slipping out the back exit. He walked alone to the public bus stop, dissolving into the chaotic crowd of commuters, returning to the absolute zero that he so richly deserved. Back at the villa, I stood in the center of the expansive living room. It finally felt like mine. I had already ordered a complete renovation. The sordid spa where he had betrayed me was gone, ripped out and replaced by a sun-drenched yoga studio. The house no longer smelled of deception. It smelled of fresh paint and new beginnings. For the first time in years, I felt a deep, resonating peace, not the fake tranquility Marcus had tried to sell me with a plane ticket. My phone chimed with a notification. It was an automated alert from the airline. The vacation package Marcus had gifted me to get me out of the way had officially expired. I smiled and tapped the screen to archive the message. I had already booked a different trip for myself. I was heading to the Maldives tomorrow. There would be no phone service, no business meetings, and absolutely no men. On my last night in the city, I sat alone by the newly renovated infinity pool. The water was still, reflecting the sliver of a pale moon. I held a glass of red wine, swirling it gently as I replayed the moment Marcus fell backward into the water. I saw his face, contorted in pure, unadulterated terror. That image, I realized, was not just about revenge. It was the precise moment I had reclaimed every ounce of power he had ever tried to siphon from me. I took a sip of the wine. It was dry, with a complex, bittersweet finish, exactly like the taste of freedom. Suddenly, the house intercom chimed, the sound cutting through the quiet evening. I walked over to the digital panel by the sliding glass door. On the screen, a pathetic, rain-drenched figure stood outside the main gate. It was Marcus. He looked like a beggar, his clothes rumpled and dirty, his hair matted. He was holding a bunch of wilted flowers, probably stolen from a neighbor's garden. His voice crackled through the speaker, thin and desperate. "Elena, please," he whimpered. "Please, just let me talk to you for 1 minute. I am hungry." "I do not have anywhere else to go." This was his final performance, a last desperate attempt to appeal to the compassion he had spent 8 years trying to extinguish. I looked at the image of the man on the screen, the man I had once loved, and I felt nothing. No anger, no pity, not even contempt. There was just a vast, quiet emptiness where he used to be. My heart rate was slow and steady. I did not open the gate. I did not even grant him the dignity of a verbal rejection. I simply pressed my finger to the block communications button on the smart home panel. The screen went black, and just like that, I erased him from my home and my life. Forever. The next morning, I pulled my new suitcase out to the driveway, but this time, I walked past the limousines and the sensible sedans. I was driving myself. I slid into the driver's seat of the brand new Porsche convertible I had bought myself the day after the divorce was finalized. The top was down. As I sped down the highway, the wind whipped through my hair, carrying the sharp, salty scent of the Pacific Ocean. I drove through the familiar streets of the city, but everything looked new. I felt as if I had just shed a heavy, suffocating suit of armor that I had been forced to wear for nearly a decade. At the airport, I moved through the private security line, my head held high. I did not look back. As I walked toward the International Lounge, I passed a large, backlit advertisement for the Elysium Retreat, the very place Marcus had intended to banish me. I stopped for a moment and looked at the picture of the serene, empty desert. I smiled, a genuine, private smile. I reached up to my left hand, where my wedding ring now sat loosely on my pinky finger. I had moved it there after the court hearing as a reminder. I slipped it off, and as I passed a large acrylic donation bin for a children's charity, I let it drop inside. It made a tiny, insignificant clinking sound as it hit the bottom, a final, quiet period on a long, terrible chapter. The plane took off, pressing me back into the plush leather seat as it climbed steeply, leaving the smog and the memories of the city far below. As we leveled out above the clouds, I looked out the window at the endless expanse of white. I pulled a notebook and a pen from my bag. On the first page, I found an old entry from a business meeting. My name was listed as Elena Vance, Mrs. Marcus. I took my pen and drew a thick, definitive line through the last 2 words. Then, underneath it, I wrote in neat, strong script, Elena Vance, CEO and free woman. The feeling of the pen moving across the paper was empowering, a declaration to the universe. When the flight attendant came by, she saw me smiling to myself. "Would you like anything to drink, ma'am?" she asked. I beamed at her, a smile so bright it felt foreign on my face, a smile that reached my eyes. "Yes," I said. "I would like a glass of your best champagne. I am celebrating." "Oh, a special occasion," she asked politely. "An anniversary?" "No," I replied, my eyes glittering with pride as I looked back out the window. "I am celebrating the day I found myself." The jet cut a sharp line through the brilliant blue sky, carrying me toward a new horizon. I closed my eyes and took a deep, cleansing breath, listening to the rhythm of my own heart. It was strong, independent, and full of life. I had walked through the storm and crawled through the mud, and now I was flying. The revenge story was over, but my life story was just beginning. Thank you so much for listening to my story. I would love to know where you are all listening from, so please drop a comment below and let's share our thoughts. If you enjoyed this, please subscribe to Lily Revenge Stories and like this video. You can also show extra support by hitting that hype button, which helps this story get heard by so many more people.